swiftly in such a way to ensure a conducive environment for sufficient humanitarian assistance activities, as well as to lead to the release of the remaining hostages, therefore resulting in realization of a sustainable ceasefire. Based on this position, we call on all the parties concerned to act immediately from a humanitarian viewpoint. In this vein, Japan voted in favor of this draft resolution. We would like to express our gratitude to Algeria for their efforts to coordinate various positions among the Council members. At the same time, in efforts to ensure a more fair and balanced text, the resolution should have included a condemnation of Hamas terrorist attacks, which the Security Council has so far failed to speak out. Though we couldn't agree on a resolution which all the Council members can support, we are all engaging seriously to stop the violence. This Council should be a place to explore and find a peace and security jointly, not a place to aim for finger-pointing. Japan will continue to work constructively with other Council members to find a path forward for peace and stability in the region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. Malta also thanks Algeria for their measured and constructive approach as penholders throughout the negotiations. Malta voted in favor of this draft, and we unequivocally reiterate our call for a permanent ceasefire. It is therefore regrettable that the use of the veto prevents this Council from calling for an end to this conflict. We also believe that the Council has provided the ongoing negotiations taking place on the ground the necessary space and time. However, regrettably, we still find ourselves on the precipice of another wave of hostilities. This will undoubtedly have catastrophic consequences on the civilian population in Rafah, an area already designated as a safe zone. We also reject and denounce any forced displacement of the Palestinian civilian population from and within Gaza. Such actions amount to grave breaches of international law. The severely deteriorating humanitarian conditions and the threat of famine within Gaza are extremely troubling and need to be urgently addressed. Israel is required to facilitate the full, rapid, safe, and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza. At the same time, UNRWA remains essential to ensure an effective humanitarian response. The broader regional situation also continues to be deeply worrying. Under these circumstances, the full and immediate implementation of Security Council Resolutions 2712 and 2720 is now more pressing than ever. Let us be clear, this Council has the duty and responsibility to make sure that its decisions are respected. We also echo the call for the remaining hostages to be immediately, safely, and unconditionally released, and we call on this Council to denounce the terrorist acts of October 7th. In closing, President, Malta underlines its unwavering commitment to a comprehensive peace based on the two-state solution. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. We want to see the fighting in Gaza end as soon as possible in a way that never again allows Hamas to carry out the appalling terrorist attacks against Israel we saw on the 7th of October last year. Palestinian civilians are facing a devastating humanitarian crisis. We're particularly worried about the situation in Rafah, where a military operation could have appalling consequences for civilians sheltering there with nowhere else to go. Ongoing negotiations are critical to secure the release of the hostages held in Gaza. We are calling for an immediate suspension in fighting to get aid in and hostages out, leading to a permanent, sustainable ceasefire. That means the release of all hostages, the formation of a new Palestinian government for the West Bank and Gaza, accompanied by an international support package, removing Hamas's capacity to launch attacks against Israel, Hamas no longer in charge of Gaza, and a political horizon which provides a credible and irreversible pathway towards a two-state solution. President, we welcome the efforts of our Algerian colleagues on this resolution, and we regret that some of our proposals were not taken on board. Simply calling for a ceasefire, as this resolution does, will not make it happen. Indeed, as it could endanger the hostage negotiations, it could actually make a ceasefire less likely. The way to stop the fighting and potentially stop it from restarting is to begin with a pause to get hostages out and aid in. That is what we are calling for. It could end the fighting now. We will continue to work for a stop to fighting, a humanitarian response at scale, the release of all hostages, and the delivery of the two sovereign states of Israel and Palestine that ensures peace, security, and justice for both countries. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, the delegation of Sierra Leone would like to thank Algeria for proposing and facilitating efforts to agree to a resolution that would have inter alia led to an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. We further thank the Algerian delegation for leading a reasonable, transparent, and inclusive process. Sierra Leone voted in favor of the draft resolution because of the imperative for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The Security Council is mandated to act promptly and effectively in order to maintain international peace and security. The Council has had its attention called to the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and for it to act under Article 99 of the UN Charter by the Secretary General. Some members of the Security Council have had the opportunity to visit both Rafah crossing from the Egyptian border and Israel, including representatives of the delegation of Sierra Leone. The assessment therefrom has been that only a humanitarian ceasefire will put an end to the unbearable killings in Gaza and certainly the looming and unthinkable catastrophe in Rafah. Sierra Leone appreciates and commends member states embarking on diplomatic engagement with parties to the conflict to secure a prolonged pause to the hostilities. But while we do so, we remain worried that reaching a meaningful conclusion in practical terms takes time, a luxury that cannot be afforded by the suffering Palestinian people, the families of the hostages, and the hostages themselves. The other main organs of the United Nations have acted timeously and effectively in this tragic conflict. The UN General Assembly has adopted resolutions ES 1021 and ES 1022, with the overwhelming majority demanding in the latter an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. The Secretary General of the UN invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter last used over half a century ago to warn us in this council of the humanitarian catastrophe we now see in Gaza. As council members, we were urged to demand an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The International Court of Justice has acted promptly and rightly when called upon to do so by South Africa. Following the requests for an indication of provisional measures, the ICJ, in its 26 January 2024 order, in the application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel, inter alia specifically ordered, and I quote, that the State of Israel shall take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to address the adverse conditions of life faced by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, end of quote. The court deemed it necessary to emphasize that all parties to the conflict in the Gaza Strip are bound by international humanitarian law. It expressed its grave concern that the fate of the hostages abducted during the attack in Israel on 7th October 2023 and held since then by Hamas and other armed groups, and calls for their immediate and unconditional release. The ICJ further reminded the parties that the provisional measures ordered under Article 41 of the ICJ statute have binding effect and thus create international legal obligations for any party to whom the provisional measures are addressed. Sierra Leone is of the view that in the absence of any prima facie change in the current perilous humanitarian conditions prevailing in Gaza, coupled with the continuing perpetuation of the hostage situation following the 26 January 2024 order of the ICJ, the UN Security Council is now more than ever compelled to act, to use the myriad of tools available to us as a council to save human lives and put a check on the mounting death toll and inordinate destruction of civilian objects. Madam President, it is extremely worrisome that after over 130 days in the conflict, a draft resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, demanding the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, rejecting forced displacement of the Palestinians, reiterating the call for full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access into Gaza, and the optimal political solution of a two-state solution could not be adopted, which we deeply regret. At this stage, with the immense suffering, death, and anguish in Gaza, the Security Council must not relent until a complete halt to the continuing hostilities in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank is achieved. To do otherwise is to accept passively the prevalent criticisms of dysfunctionality of this council. Meanwhile, the reality in Gaza is that of famine-like conditions, malnutrition, displacement, and the spread of infectious diseases, and the potential for spillover of the conflict in the wider region. Our failure to act extinguishes hope, the hope that 1.3 million Palestinians in Rafah have supplicated to us, and beyond this, the hope that humanity has placed in us as members to deliver on the Council's mandate. This must awaken our resolve to act. In closing, Madam President, Sierra Leone sincerely looks forward to not only having a positive outcome from the ongoing diplomatic negotiations being mediated by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, but also as a Security Council will have a product that will call for full and unconditional humanitarian ceasefire and release of all hostages. This, we hope, will lead to an end in the fighting and alleviate the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Señora.
Madam Chair, I would like to thank Algeria for the draft resolution that was introduced. Ecuador voted in favor of it, given that it believes that the Council needs to take a stand on the humanitarian situation, which is constantly unraveling with thousands of innocent victims. The draft that we just voted on was not perfect and included in it all the issues that we think were appropriate, but it was presented after a negotiations process that included the necessary elements about a situation which is deteriorating minute by minute. Mainly, it requests a humanitarian ceasefire that would make it possible to alleviate the situation for the civilian population. And it also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and it deplores the violence against civilians and all acts of terrorism, including, implicitly, the horrific acts committed by Hamas in October of last year. However, it's worth mentioning that Ecuador, like several members of the Council, insistently required that the text have an explicit condemnation of the terrorist actions of Hamas. And we regret that it was not included in the text. That condemnation was not there. However, we think it's important to clearly signal the responsibility that is evident of all those present and also point to the responsibilities that will be seen in future. Ecuador, Madam Chair, regrets at this time that it was not possible to adopt a resolution, and it will continue working so that the Council can take a stance and act effectively through successful adoption. Thank you.
The representative of Ecuador for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, distinguished colleagues, today we have borne witness to yet another dark chapter in the history of the United Nations Security Council. This was yet again written by the United States delegation, the U.S. delegation which continues to pursue the same objective, to provide cover for its closest Middle East ally and to drag out the time to the greatest possible extent for them to be able to carry out their inhumane plans against Gaza, specifically to expel the Palestinians from the Strip and to completely cleanse the Strip, essentially and quite literally transforming it into an uninhabitable territory. Under these circumstances, there are open discussions in Israeli political circles about categories which completely rule out the two-state solution. Once again, having pitted calls for calling an end to the carnage in Gaza against demands to condemn the actions of Hamas. In doing so, our U.S. colleagues have once again hypocritically remained silent about the fact that on the 18th October, they, having already vetoed the Brazilian draft resolution with this condemnation. The Algerian draft was capable of reversing this situation, of ending the annihilation of Palestinians in Gaza. Unfortunately, the now fourth U.S. veto prevented this from happening and doomed the fates of another thousands of peaceful citizens of Gaza. However, everybody needs to understand that this result is not the failure in the work of the UN Security Council, which today was effectively united. Rather, this is the pernicious policy of a single member of the Security Council, namely the United States. Full responsibility for the consequences of this lies with Washington, regardless of its attempts to elude this responsibility, expatiating on its quote-unquote important mediation efforts. Regardless of how bitter the aftertaste of today's meeting may be, we have no intention of throwing in the towel. The demand from the UN Security Council for the parties to immediately adopt a ceasefire remains imperative. Absent this, any council product will be devoid of practical purpose. We all had an opportunity to see this based on the example of the toothless humanitarian resolutions on Gaza that the Council had previously adopted. And these remained letters on paper because, as we warned, amid circumstances of active hostilities, it is impossible to deliver humanitarian assistance or to monitor humanitarian pauses. Now, turning to the U.S. text, which previously today was so proactively championed by the United States representative, as far as we are aware, this text has not even been officially circulated at the Security Council, not to mention the fact that there was no comprehensive or meaningful discussion thereof. For this reason, for now, this all looks like further spoilers which are designed to detract attention from the latest shameful veto exercised by the U.S., veto on a critically significant resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza. We call on the membership of the Security Council not to be misled by the duplicitous admonitions that there is a need to wait just a little bit longer. The United Nations Security Council in the world waited for 5 months, and with each passing hour that we wait, there are more and more human victims. The U.S. draft does not contain, I emphasize this, does not contain a call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The text refers only to a temporary, and even this when the conditions are ripe. So there is no real alternative to the Algerian draft resolution which the U.S. vetoed. This brainchild is no viable alternative and cannot be any viable alternative to that. This is yet another bad faith attempt by Washington to drag out the time for the purposes of advancing Israel's benefit, interest, and allowing it to definitively resolve the Palestinian question. Our shared objective is to prevent this from taking place and to achieve a just peace between the Palestinians and Israel on the basis of Security Council resolutions and General Assembly resolutions. Let us resolve this together, and perhaps our U.S. colleagues will at some point have their conscience awakened. Thank you.
Representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. سيد الرئيس.
Madam President, allow me at the outset to express my appreciation to all the members of the Security Council for constructively participating in the negotiations. Allow me also to thank all states that voted for and not against the draft resolution. I also thank those who abstained, because this draft resolution calls mainly for a ceasefire in Gaza. The draft resolution would have sent a strong message to Palestinians, saying that the world is not standing idly by their suffering. However, and unfortunately, the Security Council failed once again to rise to the calls and aspirations of peoples of the world. This failure does not absolve the Security Council of shouldering its responsibilities. This failure does not absolve the international community of its obligations vis-à-vis the unarmed Palestinian people. This failure does not absolve the occupation power of its obligation to implement the precautionary measures ordered by the International Court of Justice. It is high time for the aggression to end. It is high time for humanitarian assistance to be delivered across Gaza. It is clear that resolutions 2712 and 2720 did not achieve their objectives. It is clear that assistance did not meet the basic needs of the Palestinian people. We have to acknowledge that only a ceasefire can achieve the desired objective. Madam President, the current situation requires everyone, as stressed by the Algerian President, His Excellency Abdelmajid Tebboune, to work on putting the purposes and principles of the United Nations first, to provide the necessary protection to the Palestinian people and to put an end to their historic injustice. Madam President, the people of our region have always looked up to the Security Council as the source of international legitimacy. However, and unfortunately, the Security Council has failed them once again. Our message to you today is that the international community should respond to the calls for ending the killing of Palestinians by calling for an immediate ceasefire. All those impeding such calls should review their policies and their calculations, because wrong decisions today will have a cost on our region and our world tomorrow. And this cost will be violence and instability. So ask yourselves, examine your conscience. What will your decisions today cause? How will history judge you? Madam President, before I conclude, I would like to tell everyone that we will bury our martyrs this evening in Rafah, in Gaza, in all Palestine, and that Algeria will return tomorrow on behalf of the Arab world, on behalf of Muslim countries, and on behalf of all the free people in the world. Powered by the souls of thousands of innocent people killed by the Israeli occupation, with no accountability whatsoever. Algeria will return to knock on the doors of the Security Council once again to call for putting an end to the bloodshed in Palestine. We will not stop until this council shoulders its responsibilities in full and imposes an immediate ceasefire. We will never tire, and we will never stop. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Guyana. Colleagues, Guyana is disappointed that this Council has once again been unable to deliver a ceasefire for the people of Gaza. A ceasefire is the difference between life and death for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and others trapped in the war zone that Gaza has become. The delegation of Algeria has approached the tabling of this resolution with great patience, transparency, and inclusivity. They have listened to all sides, acquiescing to requests for additional time to be given to other efforts underway. It has been almost 3 weeks since the draft was circulated, and we still find ourselves at square one. In that time, almost 2,000 more Palestinians were killed in Gaza, another 2,000 more injured. In those 3 weeks, every aspect of life in Gaza has gotten worse. Internal displacement has increased, with a serious crisis underway in Rafah. Food insecurity continued to worsen, with the latest Integrated Food Security and Nutrition Phase Classification, IPC, report stating that Gaza now has the highest share of persons facing devastating levels of acute food insecurity that the IPC has ever classified for any given area or country. The humanitarian situation has been described as increasingly severe. Humanitarian access is extremely limited, and people's desperation has led them to looting aid trucks to secure a morsel of food. The population is in dire straits. The most vulnerable among them, including children, the elderly, and people with underlying conditions, are especially vulnerable to malnutrition. And all of this is happening in freezing temperatures. In that time, we have also seen a further hardening of positions for the worse. For example, we have heard the determination of the Israeli government to proceed with a ground operation in Rafah, despite the strong urgings to the contrary by many of its friends and partners and others in the international community. We know what a ground operation in Rafah would mean for the people who were driven there by the Israeli Defense Force. The ICJ orders of 26th of January are being completely ignored, as though there is no obligation to adhere to them. UN personnel are continuing to operate in Gaza under these extremely dangerous circumstances, with unprecedented numbers of them killed since 7th of October. Deconfliction mechanisms are not being respected, so everyone is at risk and nowhere is safe. Dear colleagues, what else needs to happen to act for the people in Gaza? How many more lives must be lost? How many more must be maimed? How many more? We need a ceasefire now. Resolutions 2712 and 2720 cannot be fully implemented if there is no ceasefire. The longer we take to agree on the need for a ceasefire, the longer this Council will be seen as being complicit in what is taking place in Gaza. To be clear, Guyana also calls for the release of all hostages taken on October 7th and Palestinians unlawfully detained in Israeli prisons without trial. Though progress has been stalled for decades, the two-state solution still remains the best option for a permanent and lasting resolution of the Palestinian question. The current situation in Gaza puts the two-state solution at great risk, especially given the rhetoric from some Israeli government officials. Guyana calls on this Council to act now for Gaza and for the future of both Palestine and Israel. A peaceful and stable Israel depends on a peaceful and stable Palestine. The two are not mutually exclusive. And a peaceful Palestine and Israel is crucial for lasting peace and stability of the Middle East region. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the observer state of Palestine.
Madam President, we thank you and your friendly country, Guyana, for your leadership of the Security Council. We thank Algeria for all its efforts and its statement that my brother Ammar delivered a few minutes ago in bringing forth the draft resolution on behalf of the Arab group that has just been voted regarding the grave situation that continues to be faced by the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip as Israel, the occupying power, carries on with its genocidal war. We also thank the 13 members of the Security Council who voted in favor of the draft, and we thank you also for your intense engagement with the Arab group led by our brother, the Ambassador of Algeria, during the course of the last 3 weeks, negotiating in good faith, of trying to save the Palestinian people's lives in the Gaza Strip and not to allow the looming catastrophe flying over our heads and having a further catastrophe on the Gaza Strip. We sincerely thank you for that effort, for your principled position, and for your determination that a ceasefire has to be demanded, implemented now to save lives, to save the Gaza Strip, to save the 1.5 million Palestinians in the Rafah district. This draft resolution was brought to the Council precisely because Israel persists with the onslaught, persists with every single grave breach it has been committing, despite the near unanimous calls by the international community for a ceasefire, and despite the ICJ provisional measures ordered to Israel to cease all acts of genocide and incitement to genocide, and to ensure humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, who every day are facing death and destruction and the torment of starvation and repeated forced displacement. It has been nearly 3 weeks since I last addressed the Council following the Court's order appealing for action to be taken to ensure the implementation of the provisional measures, to ensure a ceasefire that would protect the Palestinian people and avert the further ravaging of their lives by the Israeli onslaught. But our appeals have regrettably been to no avail. Between our last council session on the 31st of January and today, the casualty toll has risen from 26,000 Palestinians killed by the Israeli occupying forces to now almost 30,000 people killed and more than 69,000 people injured. This means that in just the past 20 days alone, Israel has killed nearly 4,000 more Palestinian children, women, and men in just 20 days. This is a deplorable consequence of inaction. It means more than 200 Palestinians killed every day. It means that by the time this Security Council session ends, more than 25 Palestinians will have been killed. It means more babies will be murdered, wounded, amputated, and orphaned. More children will die of hunger and hypothermia and disease. It means the continued threat of the further forced displacement of families, the looming danger of a mass expulsion or worse, slaughter of the nearly 1.5 million people in Rafah who have nowhere to flee, no protection whatsoever. It means the continued deprivation of the entire population of Gaza, left without food, water, medicine, and shelter, essential to alleviate suffering and ensure survival. It means that the human lives that could have been spared and saved are instead being forsaken to Israel's genocidal war machine, deliberately, knowingly, by those who oppose a ceasefire. We all know this. We know the staggering figures. We have heard the warning from the Secretary General, the heads of all UN agencies on the ground, dozens of independent special rapporteurs and humanitarian and human rights agencies the world over. We have seen it with our own eyes in pictures and videos that have seared and stained our collective conscience and broken our hearts and our humanity. In the face of Israel's brazen violation of the ICJ order, the court sent another warning, issued another decision on 16 February, reminding Israel that it is bound to fully comply with its obligations under the Genocide Convention and all the provisional measures ordered by the court on 26 January. The court also had to remind Israel that its obligations are immediate and should be effective. The call for ceasefire should have been agreed to long time ago. What threshold needs to be crossed for this Council to finally demand a ceasefire? What could be more serious than the crime than genocide? History, as my brother Ammar said, is going to judge the Council harshly. It is already doing so, impairing its credibility and authority in the eyes of people all over the world, perhaps irreparably. But we will not be complacent in this inaction. We have a duty to our people to seek every possible pathway to bring an end to the slaughter, an end to the trauma and terror, an end to the threats to expel them from their land. We will not be silent, and we will act with every legitimate means to uphold our sacred obligations to defend and protect our people and to pursue justice for them. That is why we have come back to the Security Council over and over again, imploring it to act to protect our people. That is why we will not relent in seeking accountability, calling on the Council, the General Assembly, and all states to act in line with the Charter and all obligations under international law without selectivity, without exception. We will not stop demanding accountability for the war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide that Israel is perpetrating against the Palestinian people. But accountability must move beyond words in these chambers. It must mean real consequences for the occupying power for its criminal behavior. To this end, I just have returned around midnight last night from The Hague, where the State of Palestine stood before the ICJ, appealing to the Court for Justice after more than 75 years of Nakba, 56 years of belligerent occupation, 17 years of blockade, and nearly 140 days of vindictive, punitive siege and massacres perpetrated by Israel in Gaza, which is a genocide. What crimes has Israel not committed yet? We have gone to the court along with an unprecedented number of countries to confront the Israeli impunity that has made life a living hell for the Palestinian people, appealing for an immediate and complete end to this illegal colonial occupation and apartheid regime, the root cause of all the ills our people are suffering, including this genocidal war. The court has undertaken its solemn duties, acting swiftly both in response to the case brought by South Africa against Israel under the Genocide Convention and in response to the General Assembly's request for advisory opinion, which we hope will be a true turning point in the quest for accountability and for justice for the Palestinian people. When will the Security Council finally undertake its solemn duties? When will the Council act to demand the ceasefire that has been demanded by the rest of the international community majority for months now? The veto of this draft resolution is not only regrettable after weeks of consultations with every single Council member and after endless patience by the State of Palestine, the Arab states, and nearly the entire international community that for months have demanded a ceasefire. It is absolutely reckless and dangerous against shielding Israel even as it commits the most shocking crimes while exposing millions of innocent Palestinian civilians to its wrath and more untold horrors. It is not Israel that should be protected by the veto. It is Palestinian children, women, and men who must be protected by this Council acting now. Only with a ceasefire can we give a chance for life, for Resolution 2712 and 2720 to be implemented, as the President of the Security Council has indicated correctly. Ceasefire would allow these two resolutions to be implemented for a humanitarian assistance to reach the millions of desperate people in need, for UNRWA and other UN agencies to deliver life-saving aid, and a chance for our collective efforts to chart a path for justice and peace. And as long as the Council fails to demand a ceasefire, it will be considered not only derelict in its duties, but an enabler of the most horrific crimes we are witnessing in the Gaza Strip, in these days in Gaza. The message given today to Israel with this veto is that it can continue to get away with murder. Israel cannot and should not and will not get away with it. We will not allow it. This veto does not absolve Israel of its obligations, nor of those who shield it. Not here in the Security Council, not in the ICJ, and not anywhere. Even if the Security Council continues to shirk its responsibilities, to be obstructed by the veto of a permanent member over and over, the other organs of the international system are upholding their responsibilities. And one day or another, Palestinian children will not be viewed as a demography threat, but as children with a right to life and to fulfill their hopes and dreams. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. Since October 7th, this Council has voted upon numerous resolutions constructed around the same flawed theme, the concept of a ceasefire. This word is constantly mentioned in the Security Council, in the General Assembly, and by UN officials and agencies, as if it is a silver bullet, a magical solution to all of the region's problems. For the past 137 days, the only solution discussed on the international stage is this absurd notion of a ceasefire. Will a ceasefire bring home the hostages? Will a ceasefire eliminate Hamas? Will a ceasefire disarm Hezbollah, the Houthis, and all the other Iranian terrorist proxies in our region? Will a ceasefire end the genocidal ambitions of Palestinian terror groups aiming for Israel's annihilation? We're still waiting for President Abbas to condemn the October 7th massacre. What exactly will this silver bullet ceasefire achieve? A ceasefire achieves one thing and one thing only: the survival of Hamas. Exactly the opposite of how it's portrayed. A ceasefire is a death sentence for many more Israelis and Gazans. Supporting a ceasefire means supporting the survival of jihadist terrorists that will continue butchering Israelis and endlessly spilling the blood of innocents. There is a reason, dear colleagues, that the ICJ unanimously and rightly rejected South Africa's attempt to undermine Israel's right to defend itself by calling for a ceasefire. The very idea that Israel would be denied this fundamental right while Hamas would be free to continue its terror and hold hostages is morally unthinkable, because as you know, Hamas is not going to even read your resolutions. So why are some on this council so determined to impose harmful measures that the ICJ refused to take? You all know the answers. Colleagues, a ceasefire is the epitome of a kick-the-can-down-the-road policy. A ceasefire today means immunity for baby killers and rapists. It's an easy way to make this problem an issue for another day. With a ceasefire in place, Hamas will regroup, rearm, and their next attempted genocide against Israelis will only be a question of when, not if. Hamas has sworn publicly to commit the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again until Israel is annihilated. So why is the Council, charged with security, is so fixated on aiding these monsters to stay in power? Just yesterday, Israel exposed footage proving that Shiri Bibas and her two children, 4-year-old Ariel and 1-year-old Kfir, were taken to Gaza alive. So tell me, distinguished Council members, a 4-year-old and a baby were taken hostage by Hamas, among others, and most of you choose to support a ceasefire, why do you want to leave them in Gaza? Do you not see how immoral that is, and what kind of precedent this would set for terrorists around the globe? Did you think about baby Kfir when you voted on this resolution, a resolution that would ensure that Kfir, along with 133 other hostages, remain in dark terror tunnels? Did you think about Noa Argamani? Noa's look of sheer horror as she violently separated from her boyfriend Avinoam Or and taken to Gaza on the back of a motorbike has become a symbol of the hostages' plight. In the heart-wrenching video, you can hear Noa screaming and pleading with the terrorists not to abduct her. Noa's mother, Leora, born Chong Hong Lee, a Chinese-Israeli citizen originally from Wuhan, is terminally ill with stage 4 brain cancer. All she asks is that she can hug Noa, her only daughter, one last time before she succumbs to her illness. To my Chinese colleague, I ask you, in the name of Leora Chong Hong Lee, rather than pushing for a harmful ceasefire which will keep Noa in Gaza, I urge you, pressure Hamas to release Noa so that her mother can see Noa one last time before her death. Colleagues, jihadists around the globe see that the body mandated to uphold international security is willing to allow murderous Hamas rapists to continue their reign of terror. Your calls for a ceasefire empower Hamas, giving them hope to stay in power. This does not ensure security, it prevents it. You truly want a ceasefire? Well, Israel also wants a ceasefire. Your children are not the ones that are falling in battle against bloodthirsty terrorists. They are ours. If Hamas survives, it will be our children that Hamas will murder in cold blood again. Israel seeks a ceasefire, but there is only one formula that we are willing to accept. All of our hostages must be released, and Hamas must turn themselves in. Colleagues, the Algerian resolution not only empowers jihadists by calling for a ceasefire, it also fails, again, to condemn Hamas for their heinous crimes. Not condemning Hamas's atrocities has now become a tradition here. It's tragic. Hamas Nazis invaded Israel, deliberately murdering families, raping women and girls, and destroying everything they could get their hands on. They are brutal terrorists who took pride in their barbarism. Yet, not once, not even once since October 7th, has this council or any UN body condemned Hamas and their violence. One day, we mentioned history here, when historians studied the reasons why the UN lost its standing and influence, the inability of this organization to condemn terrorists that slaughter children will be one of the driving factors. Mark my words. But the impact of this Council's decisions spread much further than this room. If this Council is incapable of condemning Hamas, UN officials feel like they have further legitimacy to whitewash Hamas. Mere days ago, Under-Secretary General Griffith stated that Hamas is not a terrorist group, but a political movement. Is the intentional, brutal murder of hundreds of civilians not terror? Is the systematic rape of women not terror? Is beheading and burning children alive not terror? We all know Hamas is a terrorist organization, yet by staying silent in the face of Hamas's crimes and not condemning them, you allow such lies to perpetuate. Your politicized decision of silence promotes the falsehoods that Hamas can be reasoned with, that they are not the bloodthirsty terrorists that they are. And this is the stance that the UN adopts and promotes. Condemn Hamas as a council, condemn their atrocities, rid this institution of its shame. Do it for the sake of those butchered, for the sake of the hostages, for the sake of morality and truth. It's in your hands. Colleagues, some of you have approached me and asked me why Israel is so critical of the UN and its agencies. The recent event over the past weeks have hopefully made it clearer to you. 1 week ago, Special Rapporteur Albanese libelously stated that the victims of October 7th were not murdered for their identity, but in response to Israel's so-called oppression. This is victim blaming and a clear justification of terror. But for some UN employees, even poisonous words are not enough. Dozens of UNRWA employees took active roles in the October 7th massacre, while many more praised the savage attack. Faisal Ali Musallem El-Naami, an UNRWA social worker, stuffed the body of Jonathan Samerano into a truck to be taken to Gaza. A Hamas data center was located directly underneath UNRWA headquarters in Gaza, connected to UNRWA's power supply, and terror tunnels have been found running underneath various UNRWA facilities, schools, everything. Out of UNRWA's 1,300 employees in Gaza, 12%, I repeat, 12% are members of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and at least 236 of them are active terrorists in these organizations' armed wings. UNRWA has been proven to be an instrumental part of Hamas's terror machine, which makes UNRWA itself a terrorist organization. Yet, rather than take responsibility for the weaponization of this murderous UN agency, Commissioner General Lazzarini has chosen to say that he had no knowledge of Hamas's hold on his own agency. This is blatantly false. Israel exposed terror tunnels under UNRWA schools and supplied evidence of Hamas's exploitation of UNRWA. You can see it in my Twitter account. I personally sent letters to the Commissioner General and the Secretary General. We implored them for years to carry out a comprehensive search of all UNRWA facilities in Gaza. Yet not only did they refuse, they chose to bury their heads in the sand and ignore the reality. This is why every report, every statement or number provided by the UN cannot be trusted. In Gaza, dear colleagues, Hamas is the UN and the UN is Hamas. Distinguished Council members, this ostrich tactic, burying one's head in the sand, is the modus operandi among UN leadership. Yet, no matter how deep one's head is buried, it will not change the reality on the ground. A terrorist is a terrorist. A terror organization is a terror organization. And a law-abiding liberal democracy will remain as such. Even if here at the UN, for political reasons, light becomes darkness and day becomes night. This is also the case with the escalating situation on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. For years, and you heard it here, for years Israel has called for this council to impose the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. Yet, for years, the UN has opted for the ostrich tactic. Tragically, this is no longer a situation that can be ignored. The clock is ticking. It is not a matter of years, but weeks before Israel will be forced to implement Resolution 1701 ourselves. Just yesterday, a Hezbollah drone was downed while flying over the Sea of Galilee, deep inside Israel. Over 2,000 Hezbollah missiles and rockets have rained down on the cities of Israel's north. 2,000. And nearly 100,000 residents of northern Israel have been displaced due to the threat posed by Hezbollah, with, of course, Iran's backing. A ceasefire in Gaza is not only destructive for Israel and the Palestinians, it also ensures that a blind eye is turned to what is unfolding in the rest of the region. Be it the Houthis relentless attacks on maritime trade, pro-Iran militias targeting even American service members, or Hezbollah's constant bombardment of Israel's north. The clock is ticking, and sadly, we will be forced to take decisive action. Terror will never be tolerated. Madam President, this Council must put politics aside for the sake of its mandate. A ceasefire that allows Hamas to remain in power means ensured death and destruction. Ignoring Hamas's atrocities and not condemning them means empowering terrorists worldwide. And focusing only on Gaza while looking away from the terror aggression across the region will lead to a future that none of us seek. The Security Council must fulfill its mandate. It must side with Israel against the forces of evil, and it must face reality. Reality is not found when one's head is buried in the sand. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement. I shall now give the floor to the representative of Qatar.
شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس.
I would like to thank you, Madam President, and I'd like to thank your friendly country on your presidency of the Security Council. It is a pleasure for me to deliver a statement on the behalf of the Arab countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. My country, the state of Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, the Sultanate of Oman, and the Kingdom of Bahrain align themselves with the statement to be delivered by the Arab group. Madam President, today's meeting is being held under extremely difficult circumstances. The situation in the Gaza Strip has increasingly deteriorated, and we are facing the worst humanitarian disaster the world has seen. According to UN reports today, there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip. Almost all residents of the Gaza Strip, whose number is more than 2 million, these 2 million people are now refugees and people faced with the risk of starvation. At a time when the aggression by the Israeli occupying power against our Palestinian brethren has been ongoing for 5 months, the GCC has cautioned against the increased frequency of military attacks against our Palestinian brothers. We caution against the increased number of victims, the majority of whom are women and children who have been killed, wounded, and people under rubble. We call on the United Nations to assume responsibility. The UN officials have said that never seen a situation such as that taking place today. The UN Secretary General invokes Article 99 of the Charter, warned about the dangers of the collapse of the humanitarian system and of public order in Gaza. He also called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. There's a need to fully implement the resolutions 2720 and 2712 of the Security Council dating 2022. Madam President, the Arab states of the Gulf Cooperation Council condemn in the firmest terms the Israeli threat regarding the launch of a military operation against the city of Rafah. In the city of Gaza, we caution against the fact that these threats portend an increase in violence levels and destabilization. These threats represent a danger to regional stability. We firmly condemn the attempts at forced displacement of civilians, and we firmly reject any military engagement in the city of Rafah. We caution against a new humanitarian disaster in that area. This is the last refuge for hundreds of thousands of displaced persons in the Gaza Strip. In the same vein, we profoundly regret the suspension by some donors of their financing for UNRWA, specifically in the light of the dangerous humanitarian situation which we are all bearing witness to. 5 million Palestinian people depend on the agency, especially in the Gaza Strip. We align ourselves in this regard with what was said by the SG in his call for countries who have halted their support to UNRWA to reconsider and to reinstate their financing for the agency to end the humanitarian disaster in Gaza to prevent it from worsening. Our countries reiterate their steadfast position in support of the just Palestinian cause and the legitimate rights of the fraternal people to establish an independent state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as a capital. Madam President, Arab states of the GCC extend their appreciation for the ongoing negotiations around a framework agreement for a new humanitarian truce in Gaza. My country, the state of Qatar, has been facilitating these efforts alongside the Arab Republic of Egypt and the U.S. to to free hostages and detainees, to guarantee greater deliveries of humanitarian assistance, and to rescue efforts in Gaza to protect civilians. The Arab states of the GCC have profound regrets regarding the failure of the Council to adopt a draft resolution submitted by Algeria. This was supported by the Arab group and the overwhelming majority of members of the Council. This draft is humanitarian by its content and aligns with IHL. We wish to emphasize in this regard that our country will continue efforts alongside partners at all levels to guarantee the achievement of an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. Let us end the bloodletting of the Palestinian people, and let us deliver adequate volumes of humanitarian assistance and relief to Gaza, and let us protect civilians. Thank you very much for your attention.
Of Qatar for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Tunisia.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Madam President. It is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab group. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you and your country, Guyana, for presiding over the Security Council this month. We thank you for holding this session. We would like to thank Algeria, the Arab member in the Security Council, for taking the initiative to table the draft resolution and make every effort during the negotiations to preserve the unity of the Security Council and reach consensus on a call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. This is the most urgent measure during these catastrophic circumstances in the Gaza Strip and the horrible humanitarian suffering of the Palestinian people. This is caused by the occupation forces' continued aggression, war crimes, genocide against the Palestinian people, which continue unabated. The occupation forces also continue to impose a collective punishment and prevent humanitarian, medical, food, and fuel assistance to be delivered to Gaza. Madam President, the Arab group would like to thank the Council members that positively contributed and constructively participated in the negotiations on the draft resolution and voted for its adoption. At the same time, we regret that the Council failed to adopt the draft resolution. It failed once again to shoulder its moral and legal responsibility as the main organ entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. We reaffirm, like other countries and members of the Security Council and UN and humanitarian organizations, the need for an immediate ceasefire, the need to prevent the occupation powers from implementing their schemes which target more than 1.5 million Palestinians in Rafah, the need to prevent yet another forced displacement of Palestinians and emptying of Palestinian land. It is unacceptable by any standard for the Security Council to continue to work at the whim of political calculations and narrow interests at a time where daily attacks continue on Palestinian people, deepening their suffering and killing thousands, including children, women, elderly, and sick people. The Security Council failed today to speak in one voice and put the principles of international law and international humanitarian law and the right to life first. This sends the wrong message once again to the occupying power and gives it a carte blanche to continue its crimes, disregarding international legitimacy and considering itself above the law and above all accountability. It worsens the lack of trust in the credibility of this important UN organ. In this vein, we reject, once again, the policies of favoritism of the occupation schemes and its protection at the expense of thousands of Palestinians who are being killed and their land that is being stolen based on the schemes of displacement and settlement. We reject the double standards that only protract the Palestinian question, that lead to the non-implementation of any relevant resolution. This has caused massacres and abuse of the rights of the Palestinian people. We call for dealing with all situations and questions with the same level of commitment and with the same standards. We call upon the international community and the Security Council to provide protection to Palestinian civilians and accelerate the unimpeded entry and delivery of humanitarian assistance to Gaza in implementation of Security Council Resolutions 2720 and 2712. We fully support the efforts of the UN Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator in Gaza, Sigrid Kaag, and her efforts to address the current catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Strip. Madam President, the current efforts to agree on an exchange of prisoners, detained persons, and on a truce do not go against the call for an immediate ceasefire, because the ceasefire can only facilitate such efforts. Nothing can justify the insistence to reject the draft resolution calling for a ceasefire and allowing the international community and the Security Council to speak in one voice, except the occupation government's attempt to continue its military operations and displace Palestinians. As we see the attempt to steer the Council away and prevent it from shouldering its responsibilities set out in the UN Charter in such catastrophic situations, we cannot help but wonder, what exactly is the role of the Security Council? When will it be allowed to play this supposed role? How many innocent lives should be killed before this actually happens? Are 28,000 people killed, 70,000 injured, and 1.3 million displaced not enough? Is the destruction of all the infrastructure, homes, hospitals, schools, worship places, and UN offices not enough? Is the killing of dozens of UN and humanitarian workers and journalists not enough? Madam President, the Arab group strongly condemns the repeated attacks by the occupation power on Syria and Lebanon and its violation of their sovereignty, the killing of innocent civilians, and anything that threatens peace and stability in the region and the world. We will continue to make every effort at all levels and in all fora so that the international community shoulders its responsibilities without any selectivity or political considerations to compel the occupation power to respect the international law and international humanitarian law and end its criminal schemes and blatant violations of the rights of the Palestinian people. Thank you, Madam President.
Tunisia for his statement. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Egypt to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members, today morning we have witnessed once again a stark example of double standards. The U.S. delegation, for the third time, has obstructed the adoption by the Security Council of a ceasefire resolution on Gaza, despite 13 votes in favor of the draft resolution submitted by Algeria with full support by the Arab and Islamic groups in the United Nations. We are grateful for Algeria, the Arab member of the Security Council, for putting forward the draft resolution. We are grateful for all those who voted in favor of the draft resolution. Yet the delegation of Egypt expresses its disappointment and frustration as a result of the obstruction by the U.S. of endeavors for ceasefire by obstructing this main body entrusted with maintenance of international peace and security to assume its duties. Distinguished delegates, where would this U.S. vote stand?
In fact, the points in the proposed resolution have all been articulated by the other 14 members of this council. These were not just U.S. ideas. They were all of our ideas that I have heard nearly every member of this council discuss both privately and publicly. Ideas that would not put sensitive negotiations in jeopardy, that could lay the foundation for sustainable peace. And yet, we were forced into a vote that did not reflect that consensus. You might ask why, and I'll leave that to you to opine on. Perhaps some on the council did not actually want a resolution to pass. Because if they did, today's vote would not have happened. Over the last several weeks, I communicated the United States' concerns publicly and privately. We submitted numerous rounds of edits. We implored our colleagues not to rush toward failure. And so, having put forward an alternative path, we intend to take it. The draft we presented is a forward-leaning resolution, and it is one that we intend to work on in good faith with other council members to ensure it gets over the finish line. That kind of process was disappointingly absent from negotiations on the text we just voted on. All to say, we're not giving up. We're eager to continue working with the council on this proposal, one that would see a temporary ceasefire as soon as practicable, based on the formula of all hostages being released, and one that would get aid into the hands of those Palestinians who so desperately need it. All told, we intend to do this the right way so that we can create the right conditions for a safer, more peaceful future. And we will continue to actively engage in the hard work of direct diplomacy on the ground until we reach a final solution.
I think we can start with Rami with Algeria. Thanks, Nate. Ambassador, so far everything that Israel has announced it has done, despite the protestations of the UN and the rest of the international community, almost 30,000 Palestinians are dead. Israel is now threatening to attack Rafah, the last supposedly safe zone in Gaza, if the hostages are not released by Ramadan. Do you really think that your draft resolution, if adopted, would prevent Israel from attacking Rafah, as they are already in violation of many Security Council resolutions, including resolutions 2712 and 2720? And why doesn't your government instead put effective limits on Israel, like conditioning military support to meaningfully impact their decision-making?
Look, we have made clear, I made it clear in my statement today, the President has made it clear, the Secretary has made it clear that no attacks on Rafah should take place given current circumstances, and we will keep pressing that. We know, we've heard what Israel has said. They have not gone in to attack Rafah, and we will keep engaging and urging and pushing in that direction to ensure that that does not happen.
What about conditioning military support?
I can't give you advance information on what we're saying to the Israelis related to that issue, but I can be clear that we are pressing the Israelis urgently every single day.
Go to Michelle.
Thanks, Ambassador. You mentioned in the Council that the call in your resolution for a temporary ceasefire reflects the language used by President Biden last week. After months of the US not wanting to refer to the word ceasefire, what's brought about the change in this language? Is this to sort of appease domestic pressures, global pressures? What's brought that on?
Look, Michelle, I've been clear from the very beginning that we are working around the clock on the ground to get humanitarian pauses that will allow for the hostages to be released and for assistance to get in. And that happened in November, and we got close to, 100 hostages out was the final number, and we got needed humanitarian assistance in. And we're continuing to work on this. This is not a change. It is not it reflects what we've been doing all along. It hasn't changed what we've been doing.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ibtisam Azim, Al-Arabi Al-Jadid newspaper. I have two questions. First, you have been saying that the Security Council, that you're not agreeing to the resolution under, different reasons, but among others that the Security Council doesn't condemn Hamas. But as a matter of fact, on October 18th, it was the US that vetoed a resolution that condemned Hamas. This is one thing. The second thing, I think a lot of Palestinians ask the question, what is the line? When is enough Palestinian? There have been more than 29 Palestinian civilians who were killed, majority of whom women and children, and people are asking how many deaths are enough for the US to stop delivering weapons and to call for a ceasefire immediately for humanitarian reasons. Thank you.
Well, in answer to your first question, there were a number of other issues with that resolution. It did call for a condemnation of Hamas. It did not recognize Israel's right to self-defense, which is a right that Israel has. And there were other issues with that particular resolution. Since that time, we still have not gotten condemnation of Hamas, despite the fact that I think it is, every council member, almost every council member will say that in their statements. We think it should be reflected in a resolution, even a humanitarian resolution. And let me just say, every life matters. And so it is important that we find a solution that will stop the killing and deaths and suffering of the Palestinian people. And that's why we're on the ground 24/7. No one else is putting their people out there. No one else is putting skin and boots on the ground to find a solution to this situation. And we'll keep working on that every single day.
Hi, Ambassador. China described your position that the Algerian draft would undermine regional efforts at the hostage deal as completely untenable given the situation on the ground. Explain then, Ambassador, how the Algerian draft would have placed those talks in jeopardy, given that the Algerian text also called for the immediate release of those hostages.
Yes, but they also call for an immediate ceasefire, which would give Hamas the cover of not releasing the hostage. Part of the ceasefire that we're working on requires that they do exactly that, and this resolution did not make that connection. And it was our concern that it would send the wrong message to Hamas, that this resolution, which actually gives them something that they have asked for without requiring them to do something in return, would have meant that the fighting would have continued, because without the hostage releases, we know that the fighting is going to continue. Thank you all.
accent of an American trucker. I love it.
Oh, sorry. You know, I realize I have to take out my earbud so people don't think that I'm being given the answers.
of shouldering its responsibilities and its duties in adopting a resolution that calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire given the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. The Arab group will continue its efforts with the international community at all the levels to establish this humanitarian ceasefire. And I'll let my colleague, Dr. Riyadh, to say a few words.
Well, thank you very much for being with us. I just want to begin by expressing our gratitude to all of my brothers and sisters of the Arab group, demonstrating, as usual, our total unity in calling for an immediate ceasefire. And also I want to express our gratitude to my brother from Algeria and his team, and to the Algerian people and their government who represented us in an impeccable way in the Security Council. And they gave all the necessary time to all members of the Security Council over the course of the last 3 weeks to sincerely and genuinely try to reach an agreement after 140 days to have an immediate ceasefire to save lives and to save the looming catastrophe above our heads in Rafah, in which approximately 1.5 million Palestinians are cramped in that small area to try to save their lives and to stop the Israeli occupying forces from invading Rafah. Regrettably, we are extremely disappointed that a resolution was not adopted in spite of the fact that there was very strong support by 13.5, you can say close to 14 members of the Security Council to that call. And we thought that this massive support in the Council, outside the Council, in the General Assembly, in the Summit of NAM, in the Summit of the Arab countries and the Islamic countries, and in the Summit of the African Union just a few days ago, in which everyone is saying ceasefire, ceasefire now. Even high school students in the city of New York who decided last week to march in the streets out of their schools demanding a ceasefire now, and millions in all corners of the globe. Unfortunately, one country does not see it that way. And if that country has the power to say, as it was announced in the Council, that they want to have a long cessation of hostilities to be able to negotiate what they are negotiating with two of our countries, Egypt and Qatar, the release of prisoners and the hostages, who is stopping them from demonstrating to us through action of stopping the fighting, and then to continue to negotiate whether the Security Council adopt a resolution or not, although it is the charter responsibility of the Security Council whenever there is conflict, whenever there is war, that the first thing that they should ask for is a ceasefire. Let me also say a few things in Arabic. أنا وصلت البارح مساء منتصف الليل قادما من محكمة العدل الدولية، حيث قدمنا مرافعة دولة فلسطين عبر أكثر من 3 ساعات تحدث فيها 5 من أفضل المحامين في العالم ووزير الخارجية، وأنا شخصيا كان لي شرف أن أتكلم في النهاية لبضعة دقائق لأنقل عذابات وأحاسيس وألم وجرح الشعب الفلسطيني أمام أعلى محكمة في العالم طالبين الإنصاف والعدالة ووضع حد لمحنة الشعب الفلسطيني وإنجاز حقوقه كاملة. وبطبيعة الحال لأنه حدد في مجلس الأمن أن التصويت سيتم صباح هذا اليوم، فبدلا من أن أمكث وقتا أكثر لأسمع إلى مرافعات الآخرين، عدت إلى نيويورك في الموقع الطبيعي لي مع أشقائي وشقيقاتي المجموعة العربية في مجلس الأمن الذين أبدعوا في طرح الموقف العربي الجماعي اليوم، وبمنتهى الألم وبمنتهى الخطورة كما عبر عن ذلك شقيقي أسامة من مصر المحاذية لقطاع غزة ولفلسطين جغرافيا وسياسة ووجدانا وقلبا، ونحييهم على ذلك. والكلمات القوية التي قالها أخي عمار باسم الجزائر التي تعبر عن عمق مشاعرنا نحن في فلسطين ونقدرها ونشكرهم على ذلك، وكذلك تعبر عن مشاعر وأحاسيس جميع العرب جميعا، وكذلك كلمتنا المشتركة التي ألقاها أخي طارق رئيس المجموعة من تونس، وأختي عالية التي طرحت باسم مجموعة منظمة مجلس التعاون الخليجي. كل ذلك يعني أبرز بشكل لا لبس فيه أنه ليس فقط عندنا إجماعا عربيا قويا حول هذه المسائل وقف إطلاق النار، ولكن شبه إجماع دولي حول هذه المسألة. وقبل أن تسألوني ما هي الخطوة القادمة، نحن ندرس كل الخطوات ولن نترك مجالا لا لمجلس الأمن ولا للجمعية العامة ولا محكمة العدل الدولية ولا مجلس حقوق الإنسان الذي سيبدأ بعد بضعة أيام. سنبقى نطرق كل الأبواب ومع الملايين في الشوارع في كل مكان في العالم من أجل أن يتوقف هذا العدوان وأن لا يتم مذبحة ونكبة رفح ونكبة أهلنا في غزة، ونتفادى ذلك عبر موقف واضح ورسمي من مجلس الأمن باعتماد ليس فقط قرار لوقف العدوان وإنما تنفيذ وقف العدوان فورا. نشكركم على تواجدكم، أنتم يعني لسان حالنا في أن تعبروا عن هذه المأساة وعن هذا الإخفاق في مجلس الأمن. انقلوه بأمانة ودقة إلى كل أنحاء العالم، لأن نريد من العالم أن يزيد من ضغطه للتوصل إلى وقف إطلاق النار. وشكرا. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Can I ask you about, you heard the US ambassador raise it in the meeting. She has a new draft resolution. It does not have the words immediate ceasefire, but it does use the word ceasefire for the first time, and there is one part of that resolution that says the Rafah offensive should not proceed. What is your view of that resolution, and are there parts of it that you can work with?
I think that you should ask her, because it seems to me that you are slightly unclear about exactly what she means. She is more qualified than me to say that. We welcome using ceasefire. She said that to us in closed meeting, call it whatever you want, pauses, ceasefire. She said that to us in closed meeting. It was good that it was said, but more importantly, if they believe in that, who is stopping them from implementing that and influencing Israel to do so? Talal.
معالي السفير، ندرك أنكم ستتجهون إلى جميع المحافل الدبلوماسية بحثاً عن الحل، ليس فقط من خلال مجلس الأمن، ولكن هل الطريق أغلق الآن من خلال المجلس بسبب التعنت الأمريكي والوقوف بصورة غير محايدة تماماً ومنحازة إلى جانب إسرائيل وإصرارهم أنه لا وقف لإطلاق النار حتى التوصل إلى اتفاق حول إطلاق سراح جميع الرهائن؟ وبالنسبة لقطر ومصر إذا أمكن، هل هناك مؤشرات الآن بوجود قادة حماس في القاهرة إلى ربما انفتاح انفراج في الملف؟ أترك ذلك لكم.
باختصار بالنسبة لنا نحن والجزائر وكل الذين يتحدثوا من العرب لن نقبل أن باب مجلس الأمن قد أغلق. سنبقى نطرق هذا الباب إلى أن يتحمل مجلس الأمن مسؤوليته وأن يتحملها بأسرع وقت ممكن لإيقاف وقف إطلاق النار.
أخ طلال، بالنسبة لسؤالك
مصر
موقف المجموعة العربية إزاء انسداد الأفق أو الطريق في مجلس الأمن، نحن كما أشرت في بداية هذا اللقاء المجموعة العربية لن تتوقف طبعا، وسيكون مجلس الأمن هو الخطوة القادمة في مناسبات متتالية، لأننا نصر على تحميل مجلس الأمن لمسؤوليته التي يقرها الميثاق الأمم المتحدة والقانون الدولي. ولكن نحن ندرك أنه كل ما فات الوقت هناك أرواح تزهق وهناك كارثة تنذر بتعميق معاناة أكثر من 1.5 مليون في رفح. سنتحرك على جميع المستويات وفي جميع المحافل، ولكن سيكون مجلس الأمن دائما نصب أعيننا لأنها مسؤوليته التاريخية والقانونية والأخلاقية أيضا.
شكرا أخي طلال. طبعا سؤالك حول المفاوضات الجارية في العواصم، كما تعلمون يعني الجهود اللي تبذلها دولة قطر بالتعاون مع الأشقاء في مصر وبالتعاون مع الولايات المتحدة لم تتوقف، فهي مستمرة للوصول إلى اتفاق لهدنة إنسانية جديدة تسمح بالدرجة الأولى طبعا هي لحق دماء أشقائنا الفلسطينيين، إطلاق سراح الأسرى المحتجزين في القطاع، وكذلك المحتجزين الفلسطينيين، لأن كما تذكرون الاتفاق الأول احتوى على ذلك وحققنا نجاح كبير فيه. لذا الجهود لا زالت مستمرة، وبالفعل هذه الأيام أيام دقيقة ومهمة للتوصل لاتفاق. سوف نبذل كل ما بوسعنا، يعني الجهود مستمرة. كنا نتمنى اليوم المجلس يتخذ قرار يدفع باتجاه ضغط أكبر على الطرف الإسرائيلي أيضا مما يساعد المفاوضات الجارية. فإحنا ننظر للتحرك في المجلس كدافع للتحرك كذلك في العواصم للتوصل لاتفاق لهدنة إنسانية جديدة. شكرا لك.
أسامة.
نفس الكلمات، ليس لدي الكثير لأضيفه على ما تفضلت به أختي العزيزة السفيرة علياء. مصر وقطر ملتزمتان وجدتان للغاية في التعامل مع تلك المفاوضات الشائكة. تلك المفاوضات بطبيعتها معقدة ولا يمكن التنبؤ بسرعة تحقيق النتائج، إنما ما نؤكده أن الجهد والعزم أكيد من كل الأطراف في محاولة لتحقيق الاختراق المطلوب، إيقاف نزيف الدماء. وكما تفضلت أختي العزيزة السفيرة علياء، لا انفصال بين قيام مجلس الأمن تحمل واجباته ووقف إطلاق النار، بل على العكس نفضل كما أوضحت في بياننا أن نتفاوض وسط الهدوء، وسط انسياب المساعدات، وسط علاج الجرحى، بدلا من أن نتفاوض تحت الضغط الشديد الذي قد ينذر بالمزيد من تصعيب المفاوضات الصعبة بطبيعتها، وبإذن الله مستمرون.
Edith.
Thank you very much. Does the Arab group have any plans to take this resolution to the General Assembly for a vote there?
Oh, this is what I meant, that you will be asking that question, and I'm glad that you're asking that question. We have all the options available to us. The resumed emergency session is one serious option. We will decide when to do it, and even if the same language or different language. And also, we are contemplating also the possibility of seeing the representative that casted the veto to address and to defend itself before the General Assembly, which is an automatic thing that could take place within 10 days. All these options are available to us. We will continue meeting as an Arab group and other friends, and we will discuss all these options, and we will decide on the step that we will begin with, but we will not relent until we succeed in having a ceasefire.
So does that mean we can expect some sooner rather than later action by the Arab group in the General Assembly?
That it's a good assumption, and I think that most likely we will be acting on the basis of your assessment. Let me also add that we in the Arab group, strong defenders of the Secretary General and his principal position in calling for human rights, human ceasefire early in the ball game, and also we salute him for his courage in invoking Article 99 when he came to the Security Council, and also we are defenders of all UN agencies working in the humanitarian field, that they are carrying honorably their mandate, and all of the lies that you heard from one speaker in the chamber are lies and reflecting noise in his head, are not reflecting reality, which is being admired by the entire international community. And such audacity of challenging the Security Council, that he is going to implement 1701, and he is the lover of Security Council Resolution 1701, when he is refusing and attacking every Security Council resolution related to what Israel should do, is beyond the theater of absurd, and you should expose such arrogance and listening to the noise in his head and not listening to the international community and all members of the Security Council when they say what they said. I think that that is worth noting, and it is up to you whether you want to reflect it in your reporting. Although I'm not advising you to waste too much time in that point, but I know I trust your judgment. Thank you so much.
On
other
challenges, yes.
Yeah, the other challenge is the lack of progress on political processes. So this is about the Congo and the region. There are processes that have been set in place. The Nairobi process, which was mostly about encouraging armed groups to disarm and to join the national program on demobilization, disarmament, and community reintegration. And this process has been facilitated by former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. And then there is a second process under the aegis of the African Union called the Luanda process that is led by the President of Angola, that was about bringing DRC and Rwanda together and to dialogue. And both processes have largely stalled in 2023. So the resumption of political processes is key to resolve some of the thorny issue and to contribute to peace and stability in Eastern DRC.
Thank you. Abdelhamid?
Thank you. My name is Abdelhamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. One of my questions you just answered about the involvement of African Union. But my other question about the flash appeal of last year and how much it was fulfilled by international community. Did you receive like 100% of the flash appeal, or how much you received? Thank you.
$1 billion. We were funded.
Can you repeat? We lost you.
Bruno, if you could start again, because we lost you at the start of the question.
Sorry. So I was saying our appeal last year was $2.2 billion. So this year appeal is bigger because there are more needs. We were funded at 40%, which is a drop of 13% between 2022 and 2023, which was very bad news. 40% was about $900 million. So that's what we raised last year.
Thank you. Ephraim, Arab News.
Thank you so much. Mr. Marquis, two questions. I know that amid all the millions of Congolese that you just described, their situation as really catastrophic, there are also 500,000 refugees from different countries in Africa taking refuge in the Congo. I think, if I'm not mistaken, from South Sudan, from Tanzania, from Burundi. What is the situation, and can you say something to the level of vulnerability of that segment of the population? That's one. Second, is there any particular country you'd like, or you think, or you expect to come forward with the funding first? Is your message directed at a particular group of countries, perhaps maybe countries that have had a hand in creating the crisis in Congo in the first place? Who should be the first one to listen to your briefing today? Thank you.
Thank you for the two questions. So there are indeed many refugees from neighboring countries who have taken refuge in the DRC, from the Central African Republic, especially from CAR, from South Sudan, from Burundi. I think there are about half a million. There is a lot of work with UNHCR to do everything we can to integrate them, to provide support to them. They are in very, very remote location, very hard to reach, alongside the borders of those countries. There are also a lot of Congolese refugees in neighboring countries, and later this week, UNHCR will launch its regional refugee response plan for the Congolese refugees in neighboring countries. So those people also should not be among the one left behind, together with the internally displaced people. In terms of, we are calling for the world to support the DRC. So there are the usual donors to the DRC, and I must say that, like in other humanitarian response, the US is by far our largest donor, and they have confirmed this morning during the launch of our response plan that they will do everything they can, and that the DRC will be one of the largest, if not their largest humanitarian operation in 2024. But we are also calling for other bilaterals to step up, and we are also calling for other countries who have also interest in the DRC to also come to the rescue in terms of funding. So we thank all of them. We are also discussing, like in many other countries, the relationship between the UN and the international financial institution when it comes to maybe not pure humanitarian assistance, relief assistance, but when it comes to resilience programming, or to working for refugees, like the World Bank and UNHCR, very, very strong cooperation. So it's also because a lot of the money is also with the international financial institution.
Thank you, Bruno. Any other questions? Excellent. Bruno, thank you so much for coming in and briefing us. You're always welcome back, and thanks again for your patience in waiting for the briefing to start.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci à toi, Bruno. All right. Couple updates for you. First, I'll start with the situation in Gaza. The World Health Organization said today it has led 2 life-saving missions to transfer 32 critical patients, including 2 children, from Nasser Medical Complex in southern Gaza on the 18th and 19th of February. That was yesterday and the day before. This is, of course, amid ongoing hostilities and access restrictions. The high-risk missions were conducted in close partnership with the Palestinian Red Crescent Society and the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The team also provided limited supplies of essential medicines and food for the remaining patients and staff who are otherwise being cut off from aid. 4 Palestine Red Crescent ambulances ensured the safe transportation of the patients who underwent medical assessment and triage under the coordination of the hospital director. Nasser Hospital has no electricity or running water, and medical waste and garbage are creating a breeding ground for diseases. WHO staff said the destruction around the hospital was, quote, indescribable. The area was surrounded by burnt and destroyed buildings and heavy layers of debris with no stretch of intact road. An estimated 130 sick and injured patients and at least 15 doctors and nurses remain inside the hospital. WHO fears for the safety and well-being of the patients and health workers who are remaining in the hospital. And the agency also warns that further disruptions to life-saving care for the sick and injured would lead to more deaths. And in a statement issued today, the World Food Programme said it's pausing its deliveries of food aid to the northern Gaza Strip until conditions are in place to allow the safe distribution of that aid. The decision to pause deliveries to the north has not been taken lightly. As we know, it means that the situation there will deteriorate further and more people risk of dying of hunger. The World Food Programme is deeply committed, they tell us, to urgently reaching desperate people across Gaza, but the safety and security to deliver critical food aid and for the people receiving it must be ensured. Meanwhile, the humanitarian coordinator for the Occupied Palestinian Territory, Jamie McGoldrick, has wrapped up a visit to Gaza. Today, he visited the Karim Shalom crossing and the Rafah crossings and saw firsthand the challenges there to getting more humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Yesterday, the World Health Organization, along with UNICEF and the World Food Programme, issued the results of a new analysis that shows a steep rise in malnutrition among children and pregnant and breastfeeding women in the Gaza Strip. The report, entitled Nutrition, Vulnerability and Situation Analysis in Gaza, finds the situation is particularly extreme in the northern Gaza Strip, which has been almost completely cut off from aid for weeks. Nutrition screenings conducted at shelters and health centers in the north found 15.6%, or 1 in 6 children under the age of 2 are acutely malnourished. Of these, almost 3% suffer from severe wasting, which is the most severe form of malnutrition. Turning to travel, the Deputy Secretary General is in Bangkok. Amina Mohammed, alongside Parnpree Bahida Nukara, the Thai Foreign Minister, as well as the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, that's the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and that's Armida Salsia, Alice Jabana. They, 3 of them opened the Asia-Pacific Regional Forum for Sustainable Development. In her remarks, the Deputy Secretary General stressed the need to continue to strive towards the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals and fulfilling the vision of the 2030 Agenda. She highlighted that the Asia-Pacific region has demonstrated how a long-term vision can be transformed into reality, adding that more progress is possible if we mobilize at a speed and scale and if we work together. The Deputy Secretary General then met with the Prime Minister of Thailand, Srettha Thavisin. They discussed Thailand's commitment to accelerating SDG implementation, including targeted actions towards the triple planetary crisis. She underscored the UN's commitment to supporting the government in these efforts. And on sidelines to the event, Ms. Mohammed also met with Wood Chong-um, the Managing Director General of the Asia Development Bank, to discuss actions related to the delivery of the SDG stimulus and reform of the international financial architecture. She is now on her way to Brazil to participate on behalf of the Secretary General in the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting. The Emergency Relief Coordinator for these United Nations, Martin Griffiths, today released $100 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund, known as CERF, to support 7 of the least funded humanitarian operations in Africa, the Americas, and the Middle East. These emergencies are in Sudan, in Syria, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. They received $20 million each, with the remaining support going to Chad, Niger, Lebanon, and Honduras. Mr. Griffiths said the new allocation is a reminder of the crucial fund, the Emergency Response Fund, play the crucial role, at a time of immense needs and chronic underfunding of humanitarian appeals. Last year, less than 40% of the $15.6 billion needed to sustain humanitarian appeals around the globe was received. The emergency fund also received less funding in 2023, which was the lowest in the last 5 years. With donations at the lowest, SURF's life-saving impact is facing serious challenges. Mr. Griffiths is appealing to member states to step up and provide full funding. And just to update you on one of these crises, and that's Sudan, our colleagues from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and the World Health Organization say that efforts to deliver life-saving health assistance to civilians across the country are continuing, despite the many obstacles that they face. Last month, our humanitarian partners provided medical consultations to more than 180,000 people in 12 of Sudan's states. They also delivered medicine to 115,000 people in 8 states and supported 16 mobile clinics in Darfur and Kordofan. The humanitarian coordinator for the country, Clementine Nkweta Salame, stressed that the unimpeded rapid passage of aid personnel, medicines, and other supplies must be ensured to support an estimated 25 million men, women, and children in need of desperate humanitarian assistance in Sudan. Turning to the Sahel, the World Food Programme today called for urgent support to safeguard the programs that help communities impacted by various crises in the region. In 2018, WFP had been working with governments and partners on resilience programs in the Sahel. That includes Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger, helping communities access locally grown and nutritious food. Thanks to sustained donor funding, more than 290,000 hectares of degraded land have been restored and 4 million people have benefited, and that's in over 33,200 villages across the Sahel. However, the Rome-based agency warns that the programs are at imminent risk of being suspended due to a lack of funding. From March onwards, WFP will be forced to reduce or stop resilience activities across the Sahel, and particularly in Niger. To sustain its resilience building support across the region, WFP requires $183.1 million for the next 12 months. And moving to Ukraine, our colleagues at the UN Refugee Agency said that after 2 years of full-scale war in Ukraine, amidst massive destruction and ongoing shelling and missile attacks across the country, the future for millions who have been displaced remains shrouded in uncertainty. According to UNHCR, there are currently almost 6.5 million refugees from Ukraine who have sought refuge globally, while some 3.7 million people remain forcibly displaced inside their own country. A recent UNHCR study shows that the majority of Ukrainian refugees and internally displaced people, that's 65 and 72% respectively, still express a desire to return home one day. However, the proportion has declined, with more expressing uncertainty due to the ongoing war. And in that regard, I just want to flag that on Friday's Security Council meeting on Ukraine, the Secretary General will be delivering remarks. Moving across the globe to Papua New Guinea, our UN team there has strongly condemned the killing of over 53 million, let's try it again. Our team in Papua New Guinea has strongly condemned the killing of over 53 people in the highland provinces of Enga in Papua New Guinea, and calls for an immediate cessation of violence and warns against possible retaliation following the killings. Richard Howard, the resident coordinator, urged all parties to immediately cease all fighting and called on authorities to fully investigate the killings with a view to bringing the perpetrators to justice. Our team on the ground stands ready to support the government in addressing long-standing issues with an ever-increasing illicit flow of arms, and remains committed to assisting the government in limiting tribal violence and bringing lasting peace to the highlands. We have a new resident coordinator to announce for, not that you would know, for Nigeria. Very important job. The UN, our Secretary General has appointed Mr. Mohamed Malik Fall of Senegal as the resident coordinator in Nigeria, following confirmation by the host government. He took his post up over the weekend and will also serve as the humanitarian coordinator for Nigeria. with more than 20 years of experience in development and humanitarian and peace-building affairs, Mr. Fall will lead the work of our UN team on the ground, boosting Nigeria's commitments to advance the sustainable development goals and to leave no one behind. We congratulate him on that post. Today is a day to mark something that we are lacking, social justice. The World Day for Social Justice. This day reminds us of the needs to build fair and more equitable societies. The International Labor Organization will mark the occasion with a series of events to discuss how to put social justice at the center of international, national, and regional policy agendas. Benno Schwinghammer.
I fight with the microphone. Okay, you saw the Security Council and you saw that the United States blocked a ceasefire call. What's your reaction?
Well, I mean, it's not the first time we've seen a veto in the Security Council. I think our message and the Secretary's message has been to repeatedly call for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. The Secretary General continues to hope that the Security Council will find a way to speak with one voice on this issue. But I think it is also important to remember that there have been a number of resolutions that have passed since October 7th, and it is important that Council members and the international community continue their efforts to move for the implementation of the existing resolutions, notably 2172 and 2720.
Okay, and the Israeli ambassador called UNRWA in his speech a terrorist organization. I guess you might want to dispute that.
UNRWA remains and is the backbone of the humanitarian work that is being done in Gaza at great cost to UNRWA staff themselves. It remains the backbone of not only humanitarian but development, socioeconomic, and educational work for Palestine refugees in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, and the occupied West Bank. We again call on donors to support the critical work that UNRWA does. Ibtisam, then Abdelhamid, then Deji, and then Dennis.
Thank you, Steph. A follow-up first on the UNRWA question. Does this worry you that such a statement by the Israeli ambassador could put the life of many UNRWA workers in danger?
Yeah, I mean, these sort of incendiary statements are not helpful to the humanitarian work that we're trying to do in Gaza and in other parts of the Middle East.
And on the American veto, this is actually the fourth American veto, if we take into consideration the veto on the amendment for the December resolution. Do you believe that the U.S., in this case, and other countries in other cases, is misusing its veto power? Thank you.
We know every time a permanent member of the Security Council vetoes, they now have to go and explain themselves, in a sense, in front of the General Assembly. This will happen. This will happen again. The veto is the 5 countries that hold the veto have a great amount of responsibility, and I think there needs to be explanation on how that veto is used. Abdelhamid.
Thank you. Hussam Abu Safiya, the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital in Gaza, said the following: we are receiving children, we are receiving malnourished children, and they are dying in front of us. Famine is becoming a major reason for death of children. How could the SG react to such a statement? Can he really
how we're reacting to such statements? Yeah. I mean, look at what the UN system is trying to do in the face of overwhelming odds, right? We just had a team that went into the middle of a conflict zone to the Nasser hospital to rescue patients. We have tried our best to deliver food and supplies to those who need it the most. I mean, our colleagues at the World Food Program and UNICEF and WHO have just issued a report on the risk of the growing risks and suffering and hunger, especially in the north. So I think on one hand, we're operationally doing whatever we can. And then on the other hand, we're continuing to advocate for the people who are suffering to ensure that policymakers and those member states that have the resources are aware of the dire needs of the people in Gaza. Deji.
Yeah, though we know that this is not the first time a Security Council draft resolution has been vetoed, but the 4 times that U.S. vetoed the resolution, they are about one thing: ceasefire, which the Secretary General called for. In this condition, what else do you think the Secretary General could do to really push for his goal?
The Secretary General is continuing to advocate and push, as you say, for his goal in his meetings with policymakers that he has behind closed doors and very much in public, and his team on the ground is continuing to advocate for the same thing.
And today, during his speech, Israeli ambassador then talked a lot about why the ceasefire is not necessary. Indeed, he said it will let Hamas to leave and come back, and there's no good for a ceasefire. He kind of forgot Palestinian people. I mean, does the UN communicate with the Israeli mission about the ceasefire? I think you guys.
Listen, we have. I mean, every representative that speaks in front of the Security Council knows what they're saying. They're putting forward their national position. The Secretary General and his representative in the Secretariat, when they brief the Council, whether it's Tor Venesland, whether it's Sigrid Kaag, whether it's Martin Griffiths or anyone else, put forward the facts as we are witnessing them. Member states will take that information and will do whatever they want with it.
Which means the UN did convey to the Israeli part
it's not a matter of us having
to save civilian lives.
Deji.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's fine.
Deji, it is not ours. Whether it's the U.S., whether it's the Israelis, whether it's the mission, whether it's representative of Palestine or any other country, they all have the facts, right? They don't need. They have the facts and they're saying what they want to say.
Okay.
Dennis.
Last week, updated Ukraine recovery and reconstruction needs assessment report was released. So I wonder, were there any similar reports prepared when U.S. convened its military operations in Afghanistan, Syria, or Iraq?
When?
When U.S. convened military operations in Afghanistan, Syria, or Iraq?
Well, there have been these reports are done at the request of the governments. There has been plenty of data and reports done on the needs for reconstruction in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in Syria, though I have to check about Syria. But I know in terms of reconstruction needs after conflict, they've been done for other countries.
And for this as well? For Afghanistan and Iraq as well?
No, for Afghanistan and Iraq as well, yep. Okay. Ephraim, and then Stefano, and then we'll come back to the room.
Thank you, Steph. There are increasing concerns we're hearing from Washington, D.C. that the Congress is headed towards permanently stopping or halting the funding for UNRWA. Is this a concern for the Secretary General as well?
Well, of course it's a concern. And the United States was a major, if not the major funder for UNRWA. We very much hope that countries that have the resources that may not have given to UNRWA as generously in the past will make up the difference. As you know, similar to my answer to Deji, I mean, member states will take the decisions that they take for the reasons that they feel they need to take them. There is money in the world, and there is enough money to fund UNRWA's operations. Currently, I mean, I was speaking to an UNRWA colleague just an hour ago. I mean, they will meet their salary and operational needs for February, March is much more complicated at this point. So we need those countries that have the resources to give in solidarity and to give to help the people that need it.
We're also seeing the U.S. Pressing for other agencies to do the job of UNRWA, including the WFP and UNICEF. And what does the Secretary General think of those calls?
The Secretary General, I think, was much more eloquent than I could ever be in answering that question at his press conference. There is no alternative to UNRWA, given its size, given the number of local staff that it employs that cannot be replaced. UNRWA is, other agencies, WFP, UNICEF, cannot step in, or WHO, and step in and do the work that UNRWA does. Stefano, then Mr. Schwinghammer.
Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, it's a follow-up on UNRWA. Actually, there is an article by Colin Lynch that came out today on the DEVEX website that says that there is basically a clash between the United States and the Secretary General about UNRWA because apparently UN chief presses relief agency to rebuff American appeals to take over tasks from the Palestinian Refugee Agency. Basically, apparently from this article...
Stefano, I've read the article. I've read the article.
So
You've read the article.
Reaction?
What is the question?
The reaction. Is it true? What's happening?
I think Mr. Lynch, like most journalists, sees different statements and gets different information and facts, and then does his analysis and puts something together. I mean, what is clear, and I think I just literally said it 34 seconds ago to Ephraim, there is no getting around UNRWA, right? No agency can come in and take over the role that UNRWA does. The Secretary General here a few days ago said it in very stark terms as well, that the other agencies do not have the capacity to come in and take over that role. Benno.
Yeah, but well, I didn't finish. I'm sorry. Another question is on the Navalny issue. Of course, there have been already several questions, but because still the body of Navalny was not shown to his mother, and there is a lot going on this. Does the Secretary General has any message for the Russian government about this issue on not showing the?
Well, I mean, I think I answered that question yesterday, where we thought it would, and I said, please, I can't be expected to remember what I said the day before. But what I believe I said yesterday is that it is important that the body of Mr. Navalny be returned to his family, and that states have particular responsibility towards people it incarcerates.
And the last things on related to this question is in Belarus, a political prisoner here, Letnik, has died in custody. Any comment on that?
I have to see that report. I have not seen that. Benno, then Abdelhamid.
Thank you. Another report is that the Russian President Putin sent Kim Jong-un of North Korea a luxury car, like a full-sized luxury sedan, and says, "Are you okay with that?" I mean, like there are sanctions in place.
Am I okay with that? I have no way. I don't want to make light of it. I have no way to judge the veracity of those reports. I don't have any comment.
But I mean, like there are sanctions and luxury cars
I literally have no comment. As much as I like luxury cars. Abdelhamid.
Thank you. As you just said, WFP is suspending its operation for security reasons.
Yeah.
And UNRWA is being underfunded. Would those developments make it much harder for people to survive in Gaza?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all. It's only Tuesday. Yes, sorry to tell you. Sorry to give you some breaking news.
Their role is rather new to Bollywood. They are intimacy coordinators.
It is a department that deals with very vulnerable scenes. So there are scenes that put performers in extremely sensitive spaces.
Many Bollywood actors say they have felt violated while filming intimate scenes. These professionals helped set ground rules for consent and safety during filming. This is one of the changes that is slowly making its way into mainstream Bollywood films because of what happened 5 years ago. In late 2018, Bollywood was rocked by allegations of MeToo against several prominent producers, directors, actors and celebrities. This was after a former Miss India and actor Tanushri Datta accused her co-actor Nana Patekar of sexually assaulting her during filming of a song on the sets of a movie. Journalist Janice Sequeira was there and witnessed what took place. She took the story to Twitter, now called X, where it spread like wildfire.
Like I put together a series of tweets and tweeted it out in the world not knowing what was going to follow. I remember in less than a few minutes actually started getting retweeted like crazy. Then the Me Too movement took a life of its own, right? For a few days, that's all. It was like every day there was either a film personality or someone from a different industry or comedians, actors, everyone was being called out.
Sona Mahapatra is a prominent playback singer in Bollywood. After the Me Too movement there gained steam, she decided to break her silence.
I called out two people, Anu Malik and Kailash Kher. They are big names. One is a music director, composer, somebody who gives work to playback singers. It's a whole system in Bollywood. It's a big part of the music industry. Kailash Kher is a huge, big music guy himself.
This wave of calling out ended some careers, not necessarily of the people who were accused, but of the whistleblowers themselves.
The fact that I spoke up was troublesome for them. It created some kind of a tectonic wave within the sets. Like there's so many other men, who knows what will happen. Okay, then the backlash I didn't expect, that I'll be thrown off the television show. So they kept it safe and clean. They threw me out of the show.
Sona Mahapatra lost some projects, but 5 years on, she's made a documentary, tours with her band and has her own music label. But she no longer feels she can count on people. Not all was lost. The movement did have some repercussions. Production houses were dissolved. Streaming giants demanded better compliance, and the wave sparked a debate about consent and complicity. But so far, there have been no convictions, and over time, the men who were accused received work elsewhere, and some even returned more powerful than before. So has anything changed for actors still struggling to make their way into the limelight? Many of the women live in this rather unglamorous part of Mumbai, informally known as the Strugglers' Colony. Mona Das came here 5 years ago to become a Bollywood heroine, but she has struggled to find good roles. She says it's hard without any connections in the industry, and many men in positions of power wanted her for just one thing.
They very clearly asked for compro. Compro is a very short, simple, sweet term for a one-night stand thing. And you sleep with me and you will get work.
Living in Mumbai is expensive and work is hard to come by. Mona and her flatmates try to pick up small roles while they are waiting for their big break. They say they regularly have to deal with predators at the workplace.
While returning that coordinator was dropping all of the female actors. So I was the one who was dropping at the end. I still have no words.
Was he touching you?
He was touching me. He was touching himself. I was perplexed and didn't know what he wanted.
MeToo found expression in mainstream productions, signaling change. Alankrita Srivastav writes and directs popular streaming shows.
Some women laugh and smile.
So I made a show called Bombay Begums, story of sexual harassment at the workplace. And when there's one young girl, who's new in the, whatever, she's very junior in the bank, she comes out with her story and nobody wants to believe her. But it's a trigger for the older character who's the CEO of the bank, played by Pooja Bhatt.
The character eventually calls out her perpetrator many years later.
It's hard to break things in one shot. So I guess it's a process.
When Alankrita Srivastav joined Bollywood years ago, there were hardly any women around. Now she's reached a kind of sweet spot in the industry where her work achieves commercial success. She's now making space so that more women can be heard.
One big shift that has definitely happened is there are so many more women on a set. So I think when there are more women assistant directors, more women assistant cinematographers, then you'll have more women directors, and that's how it sort of works. So, and you do conscious hiring. Make sure to hire enough women in all, in various, whether it's as HODs, it's as assistants and all of that.
Action.
Hello. Mona has another audition. Here she's doing profile shots in hopes of being picked as an extra in the films. But she's still battling with the same dilemma.
3 to 4 years of theatre experience hai. Compromise karna nahi hai.
I will not compromise. I only have one thing, my talent and my skills, and I want to move ahead with that. But no one wants to see that. Often I do think this is all useless, that I should go back home.
Mona's situation and the situation of many before her reflect the power dynamics of the industry. So has anything changed as a result of Bollywood's Me Too?
I think the movement per se, I feel didn't amount to much because I think the power structures in the industry are too entrenched. And in the US, when the Me Too movement happened, it was a very strong investigation that led up to the Me Too movement. And therefore they had a lot of stuff that they could go to court with and all of that. I don't think we had that here. So I think here it just became more like people are being called out, and then, it was like, and after that nothing really came of it.
So it's two things. Awareness has caused predators and others to be more careful. Producers are a lot more careful that these things shouldn't happen on their sets. And the ones who were waiting to sort of become your allies and change that conditioning, they're a lot more vocal. They're in a smaller number, but they're also vocal.
And what about Mona's dilemma? Will she find an answer? Will she keep trying? Or will she leave?
Almost 1/3 of Brazil's population lives in poverty. Millions of those residing in poor communities on the outskirts of cities are jobless. Many of them are in debt. But there's hope in the form of some tailored financial advice.
Cramped and chaotic. That's the image many have of Rio's poor communities. But what do the people who live here think? Josiane Santana is happy in her community. She's busy building up her own business. It's an open-air nail studio at the local bazaar.
No matter what crises come and go, beauty is always important for women. You just want to look good. Like Fabiana here, she takes good care of herself. Look at her hair and eyebrows.
But many here have a problem. They're in debt. And Josiane Santana is no exception. A mother of 3, she can't afford to splash out on anything.
I got into debt years ago with my credit card. And I haven't been able to reduce that mountain of debt because the last few years have been difficult since the start of the pandemic.
She sought help from a financial advisor who's focused on helping impoverished communities.
You need to be organised and create a financial plan. Sure, it's annoying, but if you do it, it's so much easier to make your dreams come true. Because with a financial plan, you know what you can afford. You'll be debt-free and no longer need to pay horrendous interest rates on your debts.
Just one of many tips from Nachi Finanzas, or Finance Natalie, as Natalia Rodriguez calls herself. The 25-year-old used to live in a poor community. She gained a degree in business administration and now runs a startup for financial consulting.
I used to get up at 5 a.m. I had to take 3 buses to the centre of Rio. I first went to work and then studied business administration until the evening. I didn't get home till 11 p.m. Then I'd record my first videos in my room, giving financial tips.
Her first videos were quite simple. Since then, she's produced hundreds of clips and now has hundreds of thousands of followers. Most of them live in a poor area, just like she used to.
Be super careful with your credit card. You can lose control so fast. Never give your card to anyone else, otherwise you'll have to pay off their debts.
2/3 of Brazil's population are in debt. The poor are especially hard hit.
It always got on my nerves that only the wealthy were involved in the public debate over investments. What about the poor from the suburbs? How can they increase the little they've saved, or at least not fall into the debt trap, where they pay loads of interest?
Fabio Gil is among those who've avoided getting into debt thanks to Nachi Finanzas. He now invests his money in the stock market and in fixed-term savings accounts, where he benefits from high interest rates. That's how he's financing his studies.
I learned a lot from Nachi's videos. For a start, she explained that I don't have to pay certain bank charges if I simply opt out of them. That was fantastic. I saved 15 euros a month in one fell swoop. Thanks to Nachi, I'm no longer losing money unnecessarily.
Fabio Gil has also learned to keep his credit card spending under control. And that's key. Statistics show 80% of personal debt in Brazil is linked to credit cards.
Parents often give their children a credit card for their 18th birthday, but usually a family member will use the card. The 18-year-old is left with the debt and gets an entry in the debt register because of a lavish relative.
Providing financial tips to the disadvantaged so they can help themselves is big in Brazil right now. The organisation Barcus helps small-scale entrepreneurs monitor their income and outgoings when preparing to open a hairdressing salon, for example.
Yes, I'm spending more than I earn. I have to rein in my spending or the numbers won't add up.
A realisation that's spreading, thanks also to Nachi Finanzas.
In Rio's poor communities, providing financial advice means above all we can prevent debt. Debt makes people fearful because the debt collector agencies are constantly calling you. Debt makes people anxious and sad and can even lead to psychological problems.
For years, spend, spend, spend was almost a mantra for many residents of poorer communities. Now people like Josiane Santana are changing course. She's focused on building a future for herself and her family.
I want my children to be able to study at a private university. A bigger house here in the community would also be a dream, even if it's difficult and expensive.
Dreams that are increasingly coming true, thanks to hard work and the help of financial advisors, who recognise the huge potential of Brazil's poorer communities.
Worldwide, more than 42,000 animal and plant species are threatened by extinction, according to the International Red List. That's more than a quarter of all species. Among them, many wild animals in Africa.
Ambrose Letoluai is a man of many talents. He knows just what his goats need. But the 30-year-old Kenyan is also a gifted photographer. It all started with birdwatching.
I always wanted to take a photo of a bird so that I can able to identify them. And the wildlife conservation, mostly like elephant as well as giraffe and the other wildlife, they are threatened. And the only thing that you can able to use is photography, and just to tell how magnificent they are and how threatened they are. And if you want to share the story, you need to have a photo or a film.
We're in the Naibunga Conservancy in central Kenya. This is where Ambrose Letoluai works. He came here straight from college, where he studied wildlife management and nature conservation. Today, he not only photographs birds, he captures nearly all the wild animals that live on the 11,000-hectare site. But photos alone are not enough for him. His aim is to protect the animals, and that also means getting local people on board and educating them.
So it has been very difficult in the beginning, but now I'm being supported by elders, supported by women, supported by children, so that we can able to execute this kind of problem that we have, and then solve the problem together. Like having this human kind of conflicts that we have, and solve together as community.
One animal that always creates conflict is the leopard. But Ambrose Letoluai now has fewer opportunities to photograph these big cats. Poaching and a dwindling habitat have caused their numbers to plummet. Leopards are now on the International Red List of threatened species. The black-coated leopard, or black panther, is especially rare. Ambrose Letoluai has tracked down 10 specimens in the area. He says they show just how vulnerable the entire ecosystem is.
So many plant species are disappearing here just because of climate change. There is no rains in this area. We face a very devastating kind of drought, and the other herbivores are dying. So when an herbivore die, then the leopard end up as well dying.
In addition, leopards are often killed by locals because they threaten their livestock and therefore their livelihoods. Ambrose Letoluai sees himself as a mediator between the wild beasts on the one hand and the local community on the other. These women used to regard leopards as their enemies. Now they're working to protect them. They call themselves Chui Mamas or Leopard Mamas.
We have come to understand the conservation and the importance of it, because now the formation of Chui Mama has bear a lot of fruits.
Because the animals attract tourism, which in turn brings money that they too benefit from. The women have now built their own small headquarters in the middle of the savannah. Another of Ambrose Letoluai's projects is this information centre. It's aimed primarily at young people. Here he teaches children how to use a camera, taking them out into nature to practice their skills. Equipped with learning sheets and binoculars, they head out on safari. Today they're watching birds.
The kid can able to learn, to say that I'm coming to this center to learn about wildlife, to watch about film, to take a photo about this particular bird, and they learn it. They even know now some names, species of some plants that you found in this particular area, and they know the use. So that is something that makes me happy, because I know this kid, when they grew up, they can go to college and then study about natural resources, and they can become someone. They can become scientists.
His students are between 7 and 15 years old. After the safari, they analyse what they've observed. For many, it's a completely new experience.
When I grow up, I want to be a ranger, because here, not a lot of people know very much about animals. A long time ago, people used to kill them all the time. But recently, I read a book in school on how we can help protect animals. Now, I want to educate people about their importance and to be one of those people who stops poaching.
I would like to protect these animals because they help us as a country. For example, they attract tourists, which brings us money. People come to see the animals, and that generates income for our communities. Another thing is that it improves people's living standards.
Ambrose Letelouai is optimistic about the future. He says young people here are becoming more environmentally aware. Using his camera, he draws attention to the beauty